Peace to you. My name is Reverend Dr. Masia Evans, and I welcome you to First United Methodist Church, here in the heart of bustling Midtown Sacramento. We are an inclusive community that values justice and always seeks to practice love first. I pray that this message will be meaningful to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Karen, for that reading. I need to start with a prayer first. Here I am, Lord, without one plea, but that thou bidst me come to thee, and that your love is truth to me. May the words from my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, my rock and my redeemer. Well, here, we say that Christmas is not over just because the 25th has come and gone. In the church calendar, it's the first, sometimes second Sunday after Christmas when we celebrate the Magi, or the three kings visiting Jesus, which is very much part of the Christmas story we all know and love. But geez, doesn't the energy turn fast toward the new year once the 25th passes? I have been bombarded with retrospectives on 2025 since Christmas Day. And best books of the year, best music of the year, yeah, that's all one thing. But 2025 has had a lot of lows. The reminiscences and photo montages from this year's newsworthy events include profound betrayals of constitutional principles and democratic governance, despicable and callous cruelty to immigrant families and people living on the economic margins, and acts of devastating and violent military aggression around the world. We live in difficult times. We want, arguably we need, hope. Yet I don't know about you, but sometimes the closest to hope I can get is that someday this will be in the rearview mirror. And that is not cutting it. When I knew I would be preaching this Sunday, I guess I engaged with today's text looking for hope. And when I found some, it came with a challenge and possibly a journey, an internal spiritual journey to which I'm inviting you to join me. One of the things I learned is that the word Matthew uses to refer to the Magi isn't a word for any old wise person or sage. It conveys a person of great eminence and power, kind of like Joseph with the Technicolor coat was to Pharaoh, or Samuel was to King Saul and King David. When you think about it, Joseph and Samuel were in fact leaders of those kingdoms, though they weren't the kings. They were indispensable kingly advisors. Maybe that's part of why along the way we started to call the Magi kings. And I do actually remember my childhood thrill at the idea that not just local shepherds, but also powerful people from other lands traveled at great distances to recognize Jesus as the King of Kings. We learn in Matthew that these Magi have come from the East. And there's a lot of speculation about what that means and a lot of various scholarly study, but one theory is that they came from Parthia. At the time of Jesus' birth, the Parthian Empire was Rome's major geopolitical rival, ruled by Phraates IV, who controlled Persia, Mesopotamia, and parts of Central Asia. So, one of Rome's chief adversaries is advised by his Magi that the star they've seen recently in the sky is actually shining over the newly born true King of the Jews, True, meaning unlike the existing Roman-appointed King Herod. Why would Phraates care? I mean, it's a lovely sentiment and all that some extremely powerful geopolitical leader realized that love or God with us has been born in the flesh and was so humbled and excited, he sent emissaries and his own gold and frankincense and myrrh, which is very expensive, I hear, to convey his adoration and allegiance to love. But what else could be going on? Why would Phraates send his most trusted advisors on this perilous journey to worship an infant king with gifts most likely from his own treasury in a land of so little value to his empire? Does he see this as someone who might someday rise up against Rome with him? Or is he maybe even just making a point to Rome through Herod about whose legitimacy he will honor? Is the arrival of the Magi an act of nonviolent political resistance? Well, that got me thinking. I mean, sure, I'm not an agent of a foreign power who can brave our current day Herod's courts and openly deny him treasures of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, promising instead to lavish them on some very real, yet most innocent of threat to his power. But it did re-inspire my admiration and commitment to nonviolent resistance. What it means, how it works, why it matters. I returned to a book I read several years ago as a student at Pacific School of Religion. Healing Resistance, A Radically Different Response to Harm by Kazu Haga. In it, Kazu Haga draws on decades of activism, training, and experience as a practitioner of nonviolence and restorative justice. He is an effective and powerful modern-day nonviolent activist in his own right, holding ground in the fight to end mass incarceration and other forms of racial, labor, and economic injustice. And I am particularly taken with his mentorship by Reverend Dr. Bernard Lafayette Jr. That's him on the right, one of the many nonviolent heroes of the civil rights movement. That's my right. Is it your right? Yeah, okay. Haga recounts the story of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's Jr. last words to Dr. Lafayette. As Dr. Lafayette was leaving the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, to join another front of the civil rights movement, Dr. King called out, "You know, Bernard, the next movement that we need to start is a movement to institutionalize and internationalize nonviolence." That very day, as Dr. Lafayette's plane landed in DC, he learned that Dr. King had been assassinated. Kazu Haga has accepted this challenge from Dr. King alongside Dr. Lafayette. That's Kazu there in the background. To institutionalize nonviolence. But what does that even mean? Remember a bit ago when I said, it's a lovely sentiment and all that some extremely powerful geopolitical leader realized that love or God with us had arrived in the flesh and was so humbled and excited he sent emissaries and his own gold, frankincense, and myrrh to convey his adoration and allegiance to love. If you joined me in a little cynical scoff, what it reveals is that we do not think it is likely, that is likely. We find the possibility that an extremely powerful and wealthy man, one willing to build and rule an empire, we find that possibility that he cared one bit about conveying his allegiance to love laughable. That is in part because we do not currently live in a world where we are supported to expect the leaders of nations to bow to love. But isn't that sad? Doesn't that reflect our collective acceptance that Jesus' birth is just a nice story, rather than a way to remember that God is with us? Alone, this sad reflection isn't evidence that we have institutionalized violence, but it is definitely evidence that we have not institutionalized the vision of a beloved community as where we are headed. Kazu Haga asks us to consider what world we could live in if our shared expectations for how people will behave did assume and nurture and call us to be the best of who we are rather than the worst. Dr. King articulated 6 principles of nonviolence, which Haga and others hope to institutionalize as expectations throughout the world about how humans live. 1, nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. 2, nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. 3, nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice or evil, not people. Nonviolence holds that unearned voluntary suffering for a just cause can educate and transform people and societies. Nonviolence chooses love instead of hate. Nonviolence believes that the universe is on the side of justice. Haga makes a compelling case that it is the expectations we hold instead of these principles that are actively destroying our family, neighbor, national, and international relationships, and even our relationship with our one and only planet. We need to institutionalize expectations that healthy, trustworthy leaders, as well as the rest of us, do center and protect healthy and loving relationship. That world, as possible, would be a cause for hope. And in fact, I've found a home and a community that is working exactly toward those expectations. One where we center and protect healthy, loving relationship. One where we love first. Can you guess who I'm talking about? We know that's not easy all the time. It's not a switch we get to flip, a one and done decision. It's a repeated decision, a practice we undertake, knowing we can't do it perfectly, and finally, again and again, we practice taking a deep breath and trying to remember who God tells us we are. And then to take another deep breath and maybe blink a couple of hard times until we can see that person in front of us who we may not be feeling loving toward is also the person that God tells us they are. Kin, members, all of us, of the beloved community. It is a practice that takes a lot of self-awareness and honesty. Sometimes it requires the support of therapists or other mental health practitioners to clear the obstacles in our way. But it matters. It matters in our most intimate relationships and in our most public ones. It matters that we do it as individuals and that we do it as a community. Nonviolence does require courage. It takes courage to be willing to recognize how and when we react as though something, anything, besides love, comes first. But my time, my patterns, my priorities, my opinions, my stuff, my reputation, my belief, my energy, my comfort. We church folk know that that is small-mindedness. And it is so painful when we have to see it in ourselves. Yet that practice, those repeated acts of courageous truth-telling about ourselves, and then choosing to center love instead of fear, love instead of that small-minded, but my, that in and of itself is an act of nonviolent resistance, especially in these days. And it is the only way to actively create the beloved community as a framework for the future. I'm not the only one, by the way, who recognized this hope in the story of the Magi. Reverend Dr. Boyoung Lee wrote about the Magi in our Sanctified Art Advent devotional. And while some of you will have already read what she wrote, I want to share an excerpt. She writes, "The Magi's presence challenges more than geography. Their journey is not simply homage. Their gifts symbolize political recognition. Herod looms large in their part of the story of Christ's arrival. Herod is a tyrant whose fear manifests as deception, surveillance, and mass violence. His fragile ego cannot tolerate the threat posed by a newborn. In his fear, Herod uses state-sanctioned terror to preserve power. When Herod is frightened, remember this from the scripture, all of Jerusalem trembles. Not because they share his fear, but because they know the violence his fear will unleash. I don't know about you, but I am so fed up with allowing the institutionalized fear of would-be tyrants be the lead in our story. Again, as Dr. Boyoung Lee writes, in a world where fear dominates headlines, politics, and even some pulpits, the Magi remind us fear doesn't have to stop us. It can propel us toward justice, curiosity, and kinship. If all of this still sounds like just so much church talk, the world as we wish it were, instead of as it is, we need to ask ourselves, are we like Jerusalem, trembling at Herod's fear? And also, maybe we need to challenge ourselves to ask, what is church talk? There's a good argument to be made that it can be an act of nonviolent resistance to the world's injustice to gather every Sunday, to congregate in order to become better love-first people. Maybe God's truth is that we need to see ourselves in a new light. Let's lean into the Magi's hope, the courage to journey to a place unknown, to assert that a different future is possible, to be undeterred by the danger of inflaming fragile egos, in order to adore the truth and to trust love more than we trust the world's institutionalized fear. Where the Magi gave love, God with us, their gold, frankincense, and myrrh, in 2026, let us give God with us our faith, our courage, and our love first. May our 2026 best of lists be rich in the evidence that we are building the beloved community as the framework for the future. Amen.
Thank you for watching. To get further connected, you can always join us in person at one of our weekly worship services, which meets every Sunday at 10 a.m. here at 2100 J Street, Midtown, Sacramento. Or for more information, you can click on one of the provided links, which is also posted in the description. Thank you for being a part of this community. And always remember, put love first. Peace.